The humid Brazilian afternoon clung to Dona Eliana's skin like a second, sorrowful layer of clothing. She stood on the cracked veranda of the house her grandfather had built, the white paint peeling like sunburnt skin, and watched the last of the moving van's taillights disappear down the dusty, serpentine road. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying scent of decaying mangoes from the untended orchard and the metallic tang of an impending storm. Inside, the house echoed, a cavern of ghosts where once there had been the vibrant chaos of a large family. The move to her smaller apartment in the city was final. The old place sold to a young couple from Sao Paulo who saw charm in the decay Eliana only felt as grief. Her 3 children had come, of course. They had performed the rituals of closure with the strained efficiency of adults whose real lives were happening elsewhere. Carlos, her eldest, a bear of a man with his father's pragmatic frown, had overseen the movers, his voice a low, steady drumbeat of instruction. He smelled of his own cologne, something sharp and urban, a stark contrast to the earthy aroma of coffee he'd always associated with his father. Then there was Isabella, her middle child, a whirlwind of perfumed hugs and brisk efficiency. She had packed the kitchen, her movements a frantic ballet of bubble wrap and cardboard, her touch lingering on her mother's fine china before sealing it away, her emotions as carefully contained as the porcelain. And then there was Clara. Her youngest, her firefly. Clara had been quiet. She had drifted through the empty rooms like a phantom, her fingers tracing the outlines of vanished furniture on the faded wallpaper, her eyes, the color of dark honey, shimmering with unshed tears. She had held her mother the longest, a tight, wordless embrace that had felt more like a goodbye than any of the others. The true heart of the house, the object that had pulsed with the family's collective memory, was gone. De cofre da família. The family strongbox. It wasn't a safe, not in the modern sense. It was a heavy, iron-banded chest of jacaranda wood, dark and gleaming with the patina of 3 generations. Its surface was carved with a map of the stars as her great-grandfather had seen them on the night he'd bought this land. The key was a heavy, ornate skeleton key that Eliana's husband, Antonio, had worn on a leather cord around his neck until the day he died. He had called the chest the heart of the house. It held the deeds, the birth and marriage certificates, the sepia-toned photographs of unsmiling ancestors, and, most importantly, the small velvet bags of gold coins and the few pieces of heirloom jewelry Antonio had meticulously added to over 40 years of marriage. It was the family's anchor, its tangible history. And now, it was missing. Eliana had discovered its absence only this morning, after the children had left. She had gone to the hidden alcove behind a false panel in the library, a secret known only to her, Antonio, and, she had presumed, the children. Her gnarled fingers, trembling with a familiar arthritis, had found only empty space and cold plaster. A coldness far deeper than the morning chill had seeped into her bones. She had called Carlos first, her voice a thin, reedy thread on the phone. "Carlos, it's gone." The strongbox. A long silence, then the sound of a car indicator ticking in the background. "Gone, mãe? What do you mean, gone? Did the movers?" "No. No one knew about the alcove. Only us." Her voice broke. "Only the family." His sigh was a gust of weary frustration. "May, you're distraught. It's the stress of the move. I'm sure it's in one of Isabella's boxes." She packed everything but the kitchen sink. But it wasn't. Isabella, when called, was a symphony of offended efficiency. "Mother, I labeled every single box. Library, books. Library, decor. There was no box for a strongbox. I would have remembered. It's probably with Clara. She was in there for ages, just mooning about." And Clara. Clara's phone had gone straight to voicemail. The cheerful, recorded message, "Hey, you've reached Clara. Leave a sparkle," felt like a cruel joke. Eliana had called again and again, the unanswered ringing a tiny hammer beating against her temples. As the day bled into a bruised purple evening, the truth solidified in her gut, heavy and cold as a stone. Clara had taken it. Her gentle, dreamy Clara, who had wept at the funeral of a stray kitten, had stolen the family's legacy. The storm broke just after nightfall. Rain lashed the corrugated metal roof of the veranda, a frantic, percussive drumming that drowned out Eliana's quiet sobs. The electricity flickered and died, plunging the near-empty house into a darkness broken only by flashes of lightning that illuminated the skeletal remains of her life. She sat on the floor of the library, leaning against a wall still marked with the ghostly outline of a bookshelf, and let the betrayal wash over her. She remembered the feel of Clara's hair, fine as corn silk, beneath her fingers when she was a child. She remembered the sound of her laughter, a bright, bubbling thing that used to echo in this very room. How could that same child have done this? The why was a mystery that coiled around her heart. Was it for money? Clara had always been impulsive, her career as a freelance artist a precarious dance of feast and famine. Or was it something else? A final, desperate act to hold on to a piece of the past that they were all being forced to abandon? The following week was a blur of acrimonious phone calls and simmering rage. Carlos drove back from the city, his jaw set in a hard line. He stood in the barren living room, the scent of rain and damp earth still clinging to the house. "I knew it," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "I knew her sentimentality was just an act. All those tears, all that the memories nonsense. It was a cover. She's probably already sold the coins, melted down Beauvais' necklace." He paced, a caged animal. "We have to go to the police, May. This is theft." Isabella arrived later, her perfume a sharp, floral weapon against the smell of neglect. She was more calculating, her anger a cold, sharp needle. "The police? And have our dirty laundry aired for all of Brazil to see? No. This is a family matter." She clicked her tongue against her teeth, a sound of pure irritation. "I always said you and Pi indulged her too much. She never learned the value of things, of real work. She thinks the world owes her a living, and now she's decided we owe her our inheritance." She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Eliana's arm. "We need to handle this quietly. We'll confront her. Together. We'll make her see reason." But Clara remained unreachable. Her apartment door was locked, her phone dead. A nervous neighbor said she hadn't seen Clara in days. The silence from her was a void into which Carlos and Isabella poured all their worst assumptions. The family, once a tangled but living tree, was now splintering into kindling. It was Carlos who, in a fit of cold fury, made the decision. He wouldn't go to the regular police. He hired a private investigator, a man named Señor Almeida, a former forensic accountant with the weary eyes of someone who had seen too many families torn apart by money. Almeida was a small, neat man who smelled faintly of old paper and mint. He listened to their story in the sterile quiet of Carlos's city office, his expression unreadable. He took notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen scratching softly, the only sound in the room besides Isabella's tense, shallow breathing. "The strongbox is a physical object," Almeida said, his voice calm and measured. "It can be traced, if she attempts to liquidate the contents. The jewelry is distinctive. The coins, if they are the ones I suspect, have serial numbers. But there is another way." He looked at each of them in turn. "Your father, Antonio Ferreira, was a meticulous man, yes? In my experience, men who keep strongboxes also keep inventories." Eliana nodded slowly, a flicker of memory surfacing through her grief. He had a book. A ledger. He would write in it sometimes, after adding something new to the chest. "And this ledger?" Almeida prompted. It should have been in the strongbox," Eliana whispered, the realization a fresh blow. "It was always kept inside." Almeida steepled his fingers. "Then we must work with what we have. We will need a full, legally recognized inventory of the entire estate. Everything that remains in the house, everything that has been moved to your mother's new apartment. We will itemize it all. This will serve two purposes. It will establish the official value of the estate for probate, and it will create a stark legal document highlighting the one, very significant item that is missing. When we confront your sister with that, the pressure will be immense." And so, the machinery of the law was set in motion. The inventory process was a peculiar and painful form of torture. A team of 2 judicial appraisers, a man and a woman with the impersonal air of scientists, arrived at Eliana's new, smaller apartment. They moved through the rooms, their voices flat and monotone, reducing a lifetime of accumulation to a list. Eliana watched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as the woman, wearing white cotton gloves, picked up a cut crystal vase. "One vase, crystal, cut glass pattern, minor chip on base," the woman said, her voice devoid of inflection. "That was my wedding vase," Eliana said softly, to no one in particular. "It was filled with white orchids." The appraiser did not look up, merely noted the description and moved on. They catalogued furniture, linens, the silverware set that had only been used on Christmas and Easter, the paintings, the rugs worn thin by generations of feet. Each item was stripped of its memory, its emotional weight, and assigned a cold, hard number. The sound of their pens, the rustle of paper, the soft thud of objects being placed back down, created a grim rhythm that underscored the dissolution of her world. Carlos and Isabella were present, their presence a tense, silent vigil. Carlos watched the appraisers with a grim satisfaction, as if their work was building the case for his righteous anger. Isabella flitted around, correcting a detail here, insisting on the provenance of a particular piece there, her anxiety manifesting as control. The process took 3 long days. The final document was a thick sheaf of papers, a brutal biography of a family told in objects and their depreciating value. Eliana felt hollowed out, as if the appraisers had not just listed her possessions, but had somehow inventoried her soul and found it lacking. The following Monday, they all gathered again in Carlos's office. The air was thick with anticipation and the smell of stale coffee. Señor Almeida was there, the completed inventory laid out on the desk before him. His expression was, if possible, even more inscrutable than usual. "The inventory is complete," he began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "It has been reviewed and notarized. It represents the entirety of the movable property of the estate of Antonio Ferreira, as found in the possession of Dona Eliana." Carlos leaned forward, his knuckles white on the edge of the desk. "And? So it's official. The strongbox, and everything in it, is listed as missing. Stolen. By Clara." Almeida looked down at the document, then back up at them. His gaze was steady. "That is the surprise, Señor Ferreira. According to this legal inventory, conducted by a sworn officer of the court." He paused, letting the moment hang in the air, heavy as an executioner's axe. "The family strongbox is not missing." A collective intake of breath. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. Carlos's face went slack with confusion. "What?" he barked. "That's impossible. It's gone. May said it was gone. We all know Clara took it." Almeida continued, his tone relentlessly calm. "The strongbox is not listed as missing because, according to the appraiser's findings, it was never part of your mother's property to begin with. It was not found in her possession because it does not legally belong to her." The room spun. Eliana felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What are you saying?" she breathed, her voice barely audible. "I am saying," Almeida said, picking up a separate, smaller sheet of paper clipped to the back of the inventory, "that the appraisers found a document taped to the underside of your late husband's desk drawer. A document that had presumably been there for some time. It is a notarized codicil, an amendment, to his will. It is dated just 3 weeks before his passing." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic 10 stories below. Almeida put on a pair of reading glasses. "The codicil is very specific. It states, and I quote, 'I, Antonio Ferreira, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the contents of the family strongbox, in its entirety, to my youngest daughter, Clara Ferreira. The chest and all it contains are to pass directly to her upon my death, to be held in trust by her mother, Eliana, until Clara's 30th birthday, at which point full ownership and control shall transfer to her.'" It goes on to list the contents in a brief summary. The key clause, the one that is legally pertinent here, is that the strongbox was never part of the communal estate. It was a specific, separate bequest. A gift, from father to daughter. The impact of his words was physical. Carlos slumped back in his chair as if he had been punched. The color drained from Isabella's face, leaving her makeup a stark, garish mask. Eliana simply stared, her mind reeling, trying to reconcile this new reality with the betrayal she had felt so keenly. "Pai gave it to her?" Carlos whispered, his voice thick with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into a new, more profound hurt. "Why? Why would he do that? Why not tell us? Is this even legal?" Isabella snapped, finding her voice, which was sharp and shrill. "He was sick. 3 weeks before he died? She probably manipulated him. She was always his favorite, we all knew it. Hanging on his every word, drawing pictures for him, she preyed on a dying man." Eliana closed her eyes, and a memory, long buried under the weight of grief, surfaced with the clarity of a lightning flash. She saw Antonio, frail and pale in his sickbed, but with a fierce light in his eyes. Clara was sitting by his side, holding his hand, her head bent close to his as he spoke in a low, urgent whisper. Eliana had thought they were sharing a final, tender moment. Now, she understood. He was telling her about the codicil. He was entrusting her with the heart of the house. And Clara, her quiet, secretive Clara, had known all along. She hadn't stolen anything. She had simply taken what was rightfully, legally hers. Her silence wasn't the guilt of a thief, but the burden of a keeper of a secret she had promised her dying father to hold. The revelation hung in the air of Carlos's office, a thick, poisonous mist that everyone was struggling to breathe. The anger hadn't dissipated, it had simply changed its target, shifting from Clara to their dead father with a dizzying, sickening speed. The betrayal felt deeper, more fundamental. It wasn't an impulsive act by a wayward sister, it was a calculated, posthumous decree from the patriarch they had all revered. "He cut us out," Carlos finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of disbelief. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the geometric landscape of the city, his broad back a wall of tension. "He looked at me, at us, and decided we weren't worthy of his treasure. He gave it all to Clara." The word treasure was laden with a bitterness that seemed to sour the very air. Isabella was not so quiet. Her composure shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. "It was her," she hissed, jabbing a finger in the direction of Clara's absent presence. "All those months when he was sick, she was always there, playing the devoted daughter. I was running my business, Carlos was building his career, we had lives. But she, with her paints and her dreams, she had nothing but time. Time to whisper in his ear. Time to poison him against us. She turned on Eliana, her eyes blazing. Ain't you, Mike? Did you know? Did you know about this slap in the face? Eliana flinched as if struck. The accusation, and the kernel of doubt within it, was a fresh wound. No, Isabella. I did not know. Your father, he kept his own counsel, especially near the end. But a part of her wondered. Had there been signs? A particular look in Antonio's eyes when he watched Clara? A secret understanding that had excluded even her? The foundation of her marriage, already shaken by his death, now felt unstable, built on hidden compartments and unshared truths. Señor Almeida observed the family meltdown with a professional detachment that felt, in that moment, like the only sane thing in the room. He cleared his throat softly. The codicil has been examined. The notary's seal and signature are authentic. The witnesses are 2 nurses from the hospice, both of whom have provided affidavits confirming your father was lucid and deliberate when he signed it. The document is legal and binding. The strongbox and its contents are the sole property of your sister, Clara. Contents, Carlos repeated, turning from the window, his face a hard mask. What contents? What was in it that was so precious he had to hide it from his own wife and sons? The question was a growl, directed at Almeida, at his father's ghost, at the universe itself. Almeida glanced down at his notes. The codicil provides only a general description, family documents, heirloom jewelry, and a collection of gold coins. However, given the legal situation, if you wish to know the specific details, you would have to ask Clara. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Isabella. Ask her? We can't even find her. She's probably on a beach in Bali, spending our inheritance. The "our" was pointed, a claim staked in the soil of perceived injustice. It was then that Eliana's phone, which had been lying silent and accusing on the desk, vibrated with a soft, insistent buzz. All eyes dropped to the screen. The name that glowed there was Clara. The timing was so perfect it felt orchestrated, sinister. Eliana's hand trembled as she picked it up. She swiped the screen and held it to her ear, her voice a fragile whisper. Clara? Mike? Clara's voice was small, thick, as if she had been crying for a very long time. I know you've been trying to reach me. I'm so sorry. I'm at the old house. Can you come? Alone? Please? The request, the location, sent a new shiver through Eliana. The old house was supposed to be empty, a shell waiting for its new owners. The old house? Why, Clara? What are you doing there? Please, Mike. Just come. There's something I need to show you. Something Pai wanted you to see. There was a weight, a solemnity in her words that cut through the static of Eliana's anger and confusion. She lowered the phone. She's at the old house. She wants to see me. Alone. No, Carlos said immediately, his voice firm. Absolutely not. This is a trick. She's trying to manipulate you, just like she manipulated Pai. We're coming with you, Isabella stated, already grabbing her purse, her movements sharp and decisive. This ends now. We're getting the truth, and we're getting what's rightfully ours. Eliana looked at the hardened faces of her 2 eldest children. She saw not the toddlers she had sung to sleep, but strangers forged in the fire of greed and hurt. She felt a surge of something fierce and maternal, not for Clara, but for the memory of her husband, for the secret he had entrusted to one of their children. He had asked for her to come alone. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a clear direction. No, Eliana said, her voice gaining a strength that surprised even her. She drew herself up to her full height, which suddenly felt considerable. Your father asked for me. Through Clara, he asked for me. I am going alone. The drive to the countryside was a journey through a tunnel of her own turbulent thoughts. The city's glare slowly gave way to the deep velvet of the rural night, punctuated by the occasional lonely light of a farmhouse. The air that flowed through the car window changed from the exhaust fumes of the city to the cool, clean scent of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. She could hear the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the distant, forlorn call of a guacho bird. Each familiar landmark she passed, the twisted old fig tree, the broken fence post, the small white chapel, was a stitch in the fabric of her life, a life that now felt like it had been woven with invisible, tangled threads. She pulled up to the old house. It was dark, save for a single, warm glow coming from the library window. The sight of that one lit window in the otherwise dark hulk of the house was strangely poignant, like a single, steadfast memory in a mind full of forgetting. The front door was unlocked. She pushed it open, the familiar creak of its hinges a ghostly greeting. The house was silent, but it was a different silence from the hollow echo of moving day. This was a waiting silence, a held breath. She walked through the dark, empty living room, her footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floors. The smell of the house was different, too. The lingering scent of her own life had been replaced by the faint, clean smell of lemon polish and, unmistakably, the earthy, comforting aroma of brewed coffee. It was Antonio's blend, a specific mix of dark beans he had always favored. The smell was so vivid, so intimately connected to him, that for a heart-stopping moment, she expected to see him sitting in his worn armchair. She found Clara in the library. The strongbox was there. It sat in the middle of the bare floor, its dark wood gleaming in the soft light of a single hurricane lamp Clara had brought. The lid was open. Clara herself was sitting on the floor beside it, her knees drawn up to her chest. She looked up as Eliana entered, her face pale and streaked with tears, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. She looked like a little girl waiting for a scolding, but there was a strange resolve in her posture. "I'm sorry, May," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'm so sorry for the silence. I didn't know what to do." Eliana stood there, her arms crossed, a mix of relief, anger, and a desperate, aching curiosity warring inside her. "Your brother and sister believe you stole from us. They believe you manipulated your father on his deathbed." A fresh tear traced a path through the dust on Clara's cheek. "I know what they think. And I let them think it. Because Pi made me promise. He made me promise not to tell anyone about the codicil until after the inventory was done." "Why?" The question was a plea. "Why would he do this, Clara? Why would he tear this family apart?" Clara shook her head slowly. "He wasn't trying to tear it apart, May. He was trying to fix it. To fix a lie." She took a deep, shuddering breath and gestured to the open chest. "He didn't leave me the strongbox because I was his favorite. He left it to me because it contains a truth that he thought I was the only one who could handle. A truth about me." Eliana's heart began to beat a frantic, irregular rhythm against her ribs. She slowly lowered herself to the floor, sitting opposite her daughter, the open strongbox between them like a confessional grate. The lamplight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, animating the ghosts in the room. "Look, May," Clara said softly. She reached into the strongbox and did not pull out a bag of coins or a piece of jewelry. She pulled out a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were not old. The paper was modern, the handwriting on the top one a delicate, feminine script that Eliana did not recognize. Beneath the letters was a small, velvet-covered box, the kind that holds a ring. Clara's hands trembled as she held the letters. "Pi gave these to me 2 days before he died. He told me that Isabella and Carlos are your children. But I am not." The words did not seem to make sense. They entered Eliana's ears as separate, meaningless sounds that refused to coalesce into a coherent sentence. She stared at Clara, at the face she had loved and nurtured for 30 years, the face that had her own father's smile, her own mother's eyes. "What are you saying?" she breathed, the world tilting on its axis. "I'm saying that my biological mother was a woman named Lucia," Clara said, her voice gaining a steadier, tragic rhythm. She handed the bundle of letters to Eliana. "She was Pi's, she was his great love, before he met you. Her family moved away, they lost touch. He married you, they had Carlos and Isabella. He loved you, May. He told me that, over and over. He said building this life with you was the greatest joy of his life." Eliana's fingers, numb and cold, untied the ribbon. The top letter was dated just over 30 years ago. *, my dearest Antonio, the news is confirmed. I am with child. I know you have your family, your life there. I do not expect anything from you. But I could not keep this from you, *. She couldn't read anymore. The words blurred. The scent of the paper, faintly floral, felt like the smell of another woman's perfume, another woman's skin. "Lucia became ill," Clara continued, her voice a monotone of recited, painful history. "It was quick. She wrote to Pi, begging him to take me, to raise me as his own. She didn't want me to go into the system. She told him I was his blood, his daughter." Clara opened the small velvet box. Inside was not a ring, but a faded photograph of a young woman with laughing eyes and dark hair, holding a baby. Clara's eyes. "He brought me home when I was 3 months old. He told you he was the child of a distant cousin who had died, a child who had no one else. And you took me in. You loved me as your own." Eliana looked from the photograph to Clara's face, and the 30 years between that moment and this one collapsed. 1,000 tiny moments rearranged themselves into a new, terrifying pattern. The slight difference in the shape of Clara's nose. Her natural talent for art, a talent no one else in the family possessed. The way Antonio had always been fiercely, almost defensively protective of her. It wasn't favoritism. It was guilt. It was a desperate, lifelong act of atonement. "He gave me the strongbox," Clara whispered, "because he said it was the only thing that was truly, 100% his to give. The coins, the jewelry he bought with his own savings, the deeds to this land that his grandfather left him. He said he couldn't, in good conscience, leave his legitimate children a legacy that was built, in part, on a lie. But he wanted me to have something. He wanted me to know where I came from, and he wanted me to know that he loved my mother, and that he loved me enough to build his entire life around a secret to keep me safe. Tears were streaming freely down Eliana's face now, hot and silent. They were not tears of anger at Antonio, or betrayal by Clara. They were tears for the sheer, staggering weight of it all. The decades of a lie, lived within the walls of this house, woven into the fabric of their meals, their holidays, their laughter. The immense, silent burden her husband had carried. The secret her daughter had been forced to inherit. She looked at the open strongbox. It was not a treasure chest. It was a casket, containing the corpse of a truth that had been buried for 30 years. The gold coins glinted dully in the lamplight, not as symbols of wealth, but as cold, metallic tears. The family documents were not just records of births and marriages, but testaments to a story that was only half true. He thought the inventory would force the issue, Clara said, wiping her own tears with the back of her hand. He knew Carlos would push for it if the strongbox went missing. He knew it would all come out. He said a family built on a hidden fault line cannot stand forever. Sooner or later, it will crack. He wanted it to crack while you were still here, May. So you would know. So I wouldn't have to carry this alone anymore. Eliana reached out, not for the letters or the photograph, but for Clara's hand. Her daughter's fingers were ice cold. She clasped them between her own, warming them, just as she had on the first day Antonio had placed this tiny, mysterious infant in her arms. "Oh, my dear girl," Eliana whispered, her voice cracking with a love that was suddenly, profoundly different, yet no less powerful. "My dear, dear girl." In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of the past in the dimly lit library, the missing strongbox was found. But the family it was meant to protect was now lost, adrift in a new and terrifying sea of truth. The drive back to the city in the pre-dawn light was a journey through a world remade. Eliana felt like a ghost in her own life, every familiar landmark now viewed through the distorting lens of a 30-year secret. The weight of Antonio's confession, delivered from beyond the grave by their daughter, pressed down on her, a physical force that made the steering wheel feel heavy in her hands. The love of her life, the man whose side she had slept beside for 4 decades, was a stranger. The child she had raised, whose fevered brow she had cooled, whose skin knees she had bandaged, was a living, breathing monument to his betrayal. And yet, intertwined with the shock and the gut-wrenching sense of deception was a thread of something else, something fragile and bewildering, a profound, aching pity for the immense burden Antonio had carried, and for Clara, who had been handed that burden as a deathbed promise. She did not go to her apartment. She drove straight to Carlos's house. The sun was just beginning to tint the horizon a delicate shade of rose and gold, a cruel beauty that felt entirely out of place. She pounded on his door, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. He opened it, bleary-eyed and still dressed in his rumpled clothes from the night before, the smell of stale whiskey clinging to him. "Mai? What happened? Did you get it? Did you get the strongbox?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep and residual anger. Eliana walked past him into the modern, minimalist living room that always felt too cold, too sterile. She stood in the center of the gray rug, her hands clenched at her sides. "Sit down, Carlos." Isabella, alerted by the noise, emerged from the guest room, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of impatient curiosity. "Well? What did she say? Where is our money?" Eliana looked at her 2 children. Her children. The words had a new, fierce, and exclusive meaning now. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of citrus cleaning products and Carlos's expensive coffee, and she began to speak. She told them everything. She told them about Lucia, about the letters, about the baby their father had brought home, about the secret he had kept locked in his heart and, finally, in the strongbox he had bequeathed to his other daughter. She spoke in a flat, exhausted monotone, the emotional reserves required for inflection completely depleted. The reaction was not what she expected. There was no stunned silence, no tears of shared betrayal. Instead, a cold, hard understanding settled over Carlos's face. He slowly nodded, as if a puzzle piece he'd been searching for had finally clicked into place. "So that's it," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That explains everything. It was never about love. It was about guilt." He was paying off his conscience. Isabella let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "I knew it. I knew there was something. All my life, I felt it. The way he looked at her. It was never the same as how he looked at us. We were his duty. She was his sin." She spat the last word, her body trembling with a venomous energy. "And he rewarded his sin. He gave her everything. He made us, his true family, into fools for 30 years. "It's not like that," Eliana said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was too raw, too shattered to defend the man who had lied to her, too disoriented to fully embrace the daughter who was not hers by blood. "Not like that?" Carlos interrupted, his voice rising. "He lied to you, May. He lied to us every single day of our lives. He brought another woman's child into your home, into your bed, and he made you raise her as your own. And then, as his final act, he gave that child our inheritance. How is it not exactly like that? The strongbox was his to give, Carlos, Eliana said, clinging to the one piece of legal logic she could grasp. He wanted her to have something that was purely from him. Something that was purely from him? Isabella shrieked, her control snapping. This land? This house? The wealth he built? Was that not from him? Or was that from you, too, May? Was that all part of the lie? Is my whole life a lie? Her voice cracked on a sob of pure, unadulterated rage. The meeting dissolved into a chaos of accusations and pain. Carlos and Isabella's world had not just been shaken, its very foundation had been revealed to be rotten. Their father was not the honorable man they had believed him to be, but a deceitful bigamist of the heart. Their sister was not their sister, but a cuckoo in the nest, the living evidence of their father's betrayal of their mother. The strongbox, and the money it represented, became secondary to the monstrous scale of the deception. Their anger at Clara was now absolute, untempered by any shared history. She was the other. The interloper. Eliana left Carlos's house feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. The city waking up around her felt alien and hostile. She went to her apartment, but the silence there was different. It was no longer the peaceful silence of a new chapter, it was the judgmental silence of a life built on quicksand. Days turned into a week. The family was a collection of shattered islands. Carlos and Isabella communicated only through their lawyers, their demands now shifting from the return of the strongbox to a formal, legal challenge of the entire will, arguing their father was not of sound mind due to guilt and illness when he wrote the codicil. They wanted Clara disinherited completely. They wanted her erased. Clara, meanwhile, had moved back into the old house temporarily, with the permission of the new owners who were sympathetic to the family situation. Eliana knew this because Clara called her every day. The calls were hesitant, painful, filled with long silences. Clara offered, multiple times, to give it all back. The coins, the jewelry, everything. I don't want it, May, she wept during one call, her voice echoing slightly in the empty house. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted my family. I just wanted to keep my promise to Pi. But it was too late. The strongbox had been opened, and its contents were not gold or jewels, but a poison that had seeped into the roots of the family tree, killing it from within. Eliana found herself paralyzed, trapped between the children of her body, who were consumed by a righteous, burning fury, and the child of her heart, who was drowning in a sea of grief and unintended consequences. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, while staring at a meaningless television program, that the final piece of the story fell into place. Señor Almeida called. His voice was, as always, calm, but there was a new note in it, one of grim finality. Dona Eliana, I have the results of the full, formal appraisal of the strongbox's contents, as ordered by the probate court. I thought you should know before the official report is filed. Eliana's heart, which had become a numb, sluggish thing in her chest, gave a feeble thud. Go on. The collection of gold coins, Almeida said, the sound of rustling papers coming over the line. They are not, as Señor Ferreira believed, high-value collector's items. The majority are common bullion coins. Their total value is approximately 30,000 reis. 30,000. It was not nothing, but it was a fraction of what Carlos and Isabella had imagined, a pittance compared to the emotional price that had been paid. Eliana almost laughed, a dry, hollow sound. All this destruction for 30,000 reis. And the jewelry, she asked, her voice tired. Costume pieces, for the most part, Almeida replied. A few items of sentimental value, but nothing of significant monetary worth. The most valuable single item in the chest is the strongbox itself, as an antique. The total liquid value of the entire contents is unlikely to exceed 45,000 reis. The irony was so perfect, so devastating, it stole the breath from her lungs. Antonio's treasure, the source of all this bitterness and strife, was practically worthless. He hadn't left Clara a fortune. He had left her a confession, a history, and a burden. The coins were not a reward, they were a symbol, a token. He had given her the only thing he felt was truly his, the truth. Eliana knew what she had to do. She called Carlos and Isabella and demanded they meet her at the old house, with Clara. She did not tell them about the appraisal. She simply said it was time to end this. They arrived in separate cars, their animosity a palpable force field around them. They gathered in the library, the same room where the truth had first been unveiled. The strongbox sat in the center of the room, its lid closed. Clara stood near the window, looking out at the orchard, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Carlos and Isabella stood together, a united front of resentment. Eliana stood before the strongbox. She looked at each of her children in turn. Carlos, with his father's stubborn jaw. Isabella, with her mother's piercing eyes. And Clara, with the eyes of a stranger named Lucia. Señor Almeida called, Eliana began, her voice clear and steady in the quiet room. The appraisal is complete. The total value of the contents of this box is 45,000 reis. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was not a silence of shock or anger, but of profound, humiliating absurdity. Carlos's face went through a series of contortions, disbelief, confusion, and finally, a dawning, sickened comprehension. Isabella let out a small, choked sound, like a sob of laughter that had gotten stuck in her throat. 45,000? Carlos repeated, the number sounding ludicrously small in the large, empty room. But, the coins? Pai always said. Your father believed they were valuable, Eliana said softly. But he was wrong. Or perhaps, he never really cared about their monetary value at all. She looked at Clara. He didn't leave you a fortune, Minha filha. He left you your history. He left you the truth. And he left us. Her gaze swept over Carlos and Isabella, a mess. She knelt down, her old knees cracking in protest, and opened the lid of the strongbox. She didn't look at the coins or the jewelry. She reached for the bundle of letters and the small velvet box with the photograph. She held them out to Clara. This is yours, Eliana said, her voice thick with emotion. This is what he really left you. Your mother's face. Your story. Then she turned to Carlos and Isabella. The rest of it, the coins, the box, you can split it between you. 45,000 reis. A small price for the destruction of our family, don't you think? She saw the fight go out of Carlos then. The rigid posture of the righteous heir slumped, replaced by the weary stance of a man who has discovered he's been battling a shadow. Isabella looked away, her cheeks flushed with a shame that was far more painful than her anger had been. Eliana walked over to Clara and took her hand. It was warm this time. You are my daughter, she said, the words firm and sure, meant for Clara, for Carlos, for Isabella, and for herself. You have been since the day your father placed you in my arms. That is the only truth that matters to me now. The rest is just dust and old paper. She led Clara from the room, leaving Carlos and Isabella standing in the silence, staring at the open strongbox and the paltry treasure that had cost them everything. They did not follow. The chasm was too wide. The house, for all its secrets and its ghosts, was no longer theirs to share. The true inheritance was not in the chest, but in the shattered hearts they would each have to learn to carry.